In order to understand how to draw a 3D areola tattoo, you're going to want to understand how to draw a sphere and what the anatomy of a sphere is. Let's start by discussing the areas known as highlight, or the focus of the light source. You're going to have the reflected highlight, or where you see an area of the highlight reflecting back beneath the midtone, and core shadow, where the light source is hidden because it's beneath. And then you have your cast shadow, where the object itself is obstructing the light from the light source and casting a shadow. So highlight, reflected highlight, midtone, core shadow, cast shadow. Now that you understand the anatomy of a sphere, let's practice drawing a sphere to understand how to draw 3D anatomy for 3D areola paramedical tattoo. Let's begin by outlining a perfect circle as best we can. And I'm going to consider my light source coming from above. And I'm only using a colored pencil. So I want to be as light as I possibly can early on, especially because right now I'm working on the top of my sphere. So I need that to be the lightest area of my light source. You can use any type of pencil to create, even a pen to create this sphere, but it's going to be easier to blend with a softer pencil on paper. Now that we have the general shape of the sphere, I just want to highlight the areas that I'm going to be focusing on my midtone and my core shadow. And then everything else above will be my highlight. But I also need to remember to leave the bottom, the very bottom, quite bare for that reflected highlight as well. Again, I'm going in with my midtone very light. You can begin to exaggerate the shading as you get towards the end, but towards the beginning you want to try to be as light as possible, because once you get too dark, it can throw the scale of the color off completely. So this is my midtone. That will be moving into our core shadow just below. Just going to start softening that edge there. Another way to add more dimension is to change the direction that you're going in a little bit. Remembering that I want to leave the very bottom for that reflected highlight, I'm just going to go back in and start building that core shadow above it while still leaving that area for reflected highlight. We don't want to leave it completely bare white, but we need to leave it alone until we are prepared to shade that whole area so that we don't forget that it's there and lose the opportunity to have that reflected highlight zone, because at this point we've got a pretty solid sphere. We can't add to it or we're going to throw the whole shape off, and we can't always fix it after that. We'd have to start over completely. That's a great example for 3D areola tattoo. You really get one opportunity in one spot to create that perfect 3D realism, three-dimensional realism for a nipple and areola for that client. So you really have to make sure that you're able to create that realism on latex and on paper before you work with that client, because there's no second chances once you begin. And notice right here, this core shadow has to be darker than our midtone. So I have to remember to stop as I get closer to where we started our midtone right above. So we've got our highlight, midtone, core shadow, reflected highlight, cast shadow, which I'll get to shortly. Just want to go back in. I almost want it to be seamless with nothing above around here, but I need it to just be enough so that you know that that is our actual sphere. And then I'm just coming back up, just feathering in some light shading around the top of our sphere. Now we're almost done with our shading of the midtone, our core shadow. We've left our highlight completely alone. We've got our reflected highlight. The only thing that we haven't added is our cast shadow. And so now we're going to add that. I just wanted to really perfect it. Almost should look like a cue ball. So I just really wanted to perfect that shading before I moved on to the final step. And it's just patience. It's different layers. I've smoothed out one complete side of this colored pencil, so I've got the ability to really blend very nicely. Okay, so now this is where we've got to be careful because based on our light source, we can't overdo the cast shadow because then again we will skew what the final result of our sphere looks like. We want our cast shadow to be just about mid-tone, in between mid-tone and core shadow. We want to focus more, obviously, of the darker part of the shadow right at the very bottom, and then lighter as it goes out. It's all about balancing our different depths of color. And this is how you're going to create a sphere, but also how you're going to create a super realistic 3D areola tattoo. Make sure you guys subscribe and follow, not only on my PMU YouTube page, but on the TikTok page where we go live every day doing a different type of 3D areola tattoo technique together. And thank you for following along and learning this beautiful technique that gives both men and women more confidence in their skin. And here you have it, our finished sphere. Now our light source is coming from the side. So we have our highlight, we have our midtone, we have our core shadow, we have our reflected highlight, and we have our cast shadow. Now, one last thing that I may even do is just extend this core shadow a little bit higher up here just to round it out a little bit more. But this is the anatomy of a sphere and one way that you can practice creating your 3D areola realism. There, just a little bit more blending as you go helps to build the dimension of our sphere. Almost looks like a beautiful blueberry or a cue ball. There you are. Highlight, midtone, core shadow, reflected highlight, and cast shadow.